the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions, providing full-service audio solutions for you or your company. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. Professional tools, experienced hosting, excellent custom content creation, as shown here every Thursday on the Spot Track Podcast. Authentic Audio is your one-stop shop for all your professional audio needs. Elevate your podcast or radio program today by visiting AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, June 3rd. Sometimes procrastination pays off. Just about ready to hit record on a lengthy podcast that I prepared for, and then Justin Jefferson's 4-year, $140 million contract bomb was dropped. Kind of knew something was coming. Schefter was uber quiet this morning. That generally leads to some fun news, and it is fun news. Mandatory workouts were beginning today. Deadline spur actions. Thank you, Andrew Brandt. Justin Jefferson is now the highest non-paid quarterback in terms of average salary in the history of NFL, as expected. The 4 for 140 is exactly what myself and a lot of other experts have been saying. The $110 million guaranteed is more. That's clearly where the wiggle room was coming from here. That's clearly what took so long. $35 million a year was always going to be the number, especially after seeing Jaylen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, etc. do what they did this offseason. This was always going to be the number, but the 110 guaranteed. And again, we need to see exactly what those details curtail, but I don't imagine there's too much fluff inside those 110. Certainly interested to see the breakdown as well, though. This is the benefit of having a rookie quarterback, and this is what Minnesota has chosen to do by letting Kirk Cousins walk away to Atlanta and selecting J.J. McCarthy and adding Sam Darnold on basically a $1 for $8 million contract. You now have the ability to offer an historic contract to an historic wide receiver. So here we are. I was about to sit here and talk about Jaylen Waddle's extension. I'm still going to do that because we don't have the guts of this Jefferson contract, but certainly this is the bar that we were always going to be leading to this offseason. It now sets the CeeDee Lamb contract. Too long yet again. All right. If they thought they were getting CeeDee Lamb for any type of value, we now have 4 or 5 offseason extensions on the books that say otherwise. CeeDee Lamb is neck and neck with Justin Jefferson's production over the past 2 years, as you've heard me say multiple times on this podcast. This is the number. Okay, so maybe it's $35 million a year and $105 guaranteed for CeeDee Lamb. But if I'm him, I'm looking at this contract not as a ceiling, but as an actual foundation. He has been that good, important, and he would be that type of player with any organization, because we know that Dak Prescott is an excellent quarterback, but I think that many teams feel as though they have their version of Dak Prescott, which means CeeDee Lamb is just that damn good. And I expect that contract to look extremely similar because it's 5th-year option for both these players right now. Jefferson was going to hold out. Now he doesn't have to. Just quickly, you know where he ranks with all this stuff, but I quickly threw out some numbers this morning as soon as this sucker was signed. The top average paid players in the league right now, 1 through 15 are quarterbacks. That ranges from $55 million Joe Burrow down to Derek Carr at $37.5 million. Hold your applause. Justin Jefferson is now 16th at $35 million. That is the top non-paid quarterback, surpassing Nick Bosa's $34 million, which was signed late last summer. In terms of these guarantees, 1 through 11 are quarterbacks, $230 million. Deshaun Watson down to $126 million. Nick Bosa slightly ahead of Jefferson at $122.5, and Jefferson's $110 is 13th overall in the league and easily number 1 in terms of wide receiver pay. So let's talk about the wide receiver stuff kind of exclusively here, because I was about to do it anyway. Now we've got even more reasons to do so. Overall contract value for wide receivers. So that's new money, new years, right? Just the money part of this. The 140 ties Devontae Adams. That's probably not going to be set up there too much because nobody really cares about the total value stuff here, right? But everything about this contract from A to B to Z is going to be number 1 in terms of wide receivers, and for the most part, in terms of non-quarterback contracts. So the 140 new money ties Devontae Adams overall. I'm going to continue to click on metrics here and see how far I can get. We talked about the contract average. We'll see about the signing bonus. I imagine it's hefty unless they constructed a multiple bonus system, which they have been somewhat iffy to do in Minnesota. Not as much as other teams, though. You have to think with a contract this size that they've considered it. Justin Jefferson's $35 million per year contract represents 13.7. That's very, very good news for a team that has a rookie quarterback. All right. And I can tell you right now, Tyreek Hill's 13.4%. That is not a number one. That's a good not number one for Minnesota. That means they got the job done, making him the top paid across the board. But from a cap perspective, if you want to look at it that way, and I think it's becoming more increasingly important to do so, there's still some value here. There's still some cap percentage value based on where the league is going with this overall salary cap and what Minnesota is going to be able to do around him, especially if McCarthy's the guy and he can sit on that rookie contract for at least 3, maybe 4 seasons before needing that massive extension. So they've timed this properly. They've priced this properly. And when you think about it, not so much in just the actual numbers that are going to get thrown out there by the mass media, there's chance to have value here. There's chance for this to be not even enough when the overall package is done. The 110 is so much more than any other wide receiver has received guaranteed. And by the way, when A.J. Brown signed his extension in Philly, his $84 million was $7 million more than any other wide receiver had ever received. Okay. So we're not only resetting markets here, we are destroying markets. And it has to do with the health of the league, with the health of the salary cap, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, by the way, J.J. McCarthy's contract helps here. But the gap now between 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in terms of wide receiver total guarantees is Jefferson at 110, down to $84 million for A.J. Brown, down to 77 for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Waddle comes in just under that at 76, and Cooper Kupp's extension a couple of years ago came in at 75. That used to be the bar. That little 3-year extension for Cooper Kupp was the bar at $75 million. And these 4 names now, Waddle, St. Brown, A.J. Brown, and Justin Jefferson, have veritably destroyed that market. And Jefferson deserved to. CeeDee Lamb's going to be there with him. Jamar Chase is eventually going to be there with him. This is not a one-and-done scenario. It's just not. Even though Jefferson is considered as the be-all number 1 wide receiver in football, I'm here to tell you, production-wise, Chase and Lamb have a case to be in this conversation we're having right now. It's exciting. It's exciting. And the more we talk about the wide receivers, the more I want to just extrapolate this thing out, because here's what's happening with this wide receiver market, which is really unique to every position other than quarterback. Every contract that is signed, right? I just gave you a list that the top 4 guaranteed contracts in terms of wide receivers just happened an hour and a half ago. Every metric from a wide receiver standpoint is exploding at the top of its market. And yet we're seeing half the league reestablish a top flight number 1 or number 2 wide receiver in every draft. Those two things are happening simultaneously, and it's not just a one-off, where we've talked about, right, evident that the draft is going to be loaded with wide receivers, and yet it is still damn important to pay at least 1 top wide receiver on your roster, maybe 2, right? Miami now has 2, and to say that they're thinking about Waddle as the guy going forward might be incorrect, because we're already hearing rumors about a Tyreek Hill extension, which would mean cash in hand, lower cap hit, be able to keep this entire band together. And oh, by the way, Tua needs a contract in the next hour and a half or so as well. So Miami is setting a precedent, or about to set a precedent, that really no other team in the league has been able to successfully navigate. The Chargers tried to with Herbert's contract, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen, at least for a minute and a half, right? They tried that strategy of having that core of value deal, but not a minimum contract. So they had weapons and quarterbacks paid all simultaneously, and did it work? No. And the defensive contracts maybe on that side of the ball that were well paid sort of let that organization down, as did injuries, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't seen this formula work, is my point. And what's fascinating is nothing I said and nothing that is on the books in terms of stats and standings and production is scaring teams away from drafting high, and signing big. It's happening left and right consistently throughout each offseason. We're not even close to done with this. Here's what I think it is. Mari Cooper has been traded. Devontae Adams has been traded. Tyreek Hill has been traded. Keenan Allen has been traded. DJ Moore has been traded. Jerry Jeudy has been traded. That's just in the top 20 of wide receiver contracts. Okay, I could keep going. Brandon Cooks has been traded. There's more down the list. Deontay Johnson has been traded. Stephon Diggs has been traded. That's part of this conversation. What we're seeing is the NBA model. We're seeing that, sure, there's going to be a guy every year that we could replace our guys with. But it's not prudent to do that because we need 6 wide receivers at all time. And we need 4 of them to be outstanding in whatever role they're being asked to play, whether it's, down the field, go routes, whether it's across the middle, whether it's slot, whether it's, the gamut now. It's a passing league. It's a big roster. This is where the bulk of your attention has to focus on. It's been evident in the fantasy game too. You're bulking up on bench player, wide receiver one, right? This is clearly the Dolphins model. It's becoming the 49ers model. Just give us everyone and we'll pay everyone. Maybe drop one of those names off every year. Maybe trade one of those players every year to always get more ammo to be able to replenish ourselves via the draft. And the process just continues in this big, huge cycle. Sign, draft, trade. Sign, draft, trade. Sure, there's some releases in there. Some players have to fall by the wayside and aren't tradable. That's going to happen. It's going to be part of the process. But more than any other position in football, all of these transactions are happening left and right. Left and right. I can't give you another position where I can go down a list of a top 20 paid and find that many players that have been acquired by a trade. It's a revolving door. And teams know it. And teams know that we can get this guy under contract, use him heavily for 2 years, and there's going to be a team that is just in the cycle that are, and they will give up a mid-round draft pick at least to take him off our hands for the final 2 or 3 seasons of this contract. We're now seeing it more and more and more. It's gaining more and more momentum, and it's allowing teams to bulk up, overpay for maybe a year or 2, get away with it, move on from it, acquire some draft picks, and restart the process with that one singular role. Slot receiver. Acquire draft assets for a second round pick next year, replenish their pool with Keon Coleman, hoping that a couple of the internal players grow into their roles, right? Shakir, maybe even a tight end or 2. And they now have ammo next season with that second round pick to further replenish the pool for a player like Gabe Davis, who they moved on for, et cetera, et cetera. It's a constant cycle. And it has to be its own set of books for teams now. That's how powerful this position has become and how intricate all the avenues and channels have become with paying top players, drafting for value, bulking up with mid-round players, adding a couple of veteran minimum contracts just to try to find a 4th or 5th player at maximum value, knowing when to move on, understanding what kind of compensation you can get to replenish the pool. It's an element all of itself in terms of sports business. That's what this wide receiver market has become. It's fascinating as hell. I can't stop talking about it. And I could sit here right now and give you 5 more names of players that I'm not even sure will be on their current roster next season, right? Chris Godwin, no extension in sight. Cortland Sutton, I know he's holding out for an extension. I think he's off this roster because of what Denver looks like right now and where they may be headed. What's the future of Drake London in Atlanta? Okay, can he have a breakout season that keeps him there? Same with Garrett Wilson. If Aaron Rodgers and that organization decides to flip over the front office and coach, does Garrett Wilson have a long-term future with the Jets? Amari Cooper is on an expiring contract in Cleveland. They acquired Jerry Jeudy already. We know that these Seattle situations in flux with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Geno Smith, it's constant. Okay. It's constant. Devontae, right, is in a mess of a quarterback situation, at least on the surface with the Raiders. He's a trade candidate every day until the trade deadline, until we see that it's going to work. And when it doesn't, he's going to be barking because he hasn't yet. He's done everything right. I can't stop finding names in the top 10. We've talked about Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and where that situation may be headed, especially if Brock Purdy needs, $200 million guaranteed next year. It's constant and it's fascinating and it's fun. And at some point in time, there will be a shift. Okay. There will be a shift. Teams won't continue to pay at this pace. So I just want to enjoy the window that we're in because you just don't have this in sports. You just don't have a singular position that is so vital to have elite players at, but also so vital to have depth at, that you're willing to overpay for the top of the market, at the middle of the market, and in the draft. It's just fun. It's really fun. I would kill for baseball to have one position that was this important. There's a world where the shortstop kind of is, except for there's like 100 of them now, right? You're able to plug and play outfielders as shortstop now, as we've seen the Dodgers do. So it's unique. It's a very unique situation, and it's really fun for contract nerds like me. And we're not going to see DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel lock in those contracts because those are positions that I believe that teams can simply go back to the draft in, let these players grow up one season, and then kick those other players to the curb. We're not seeing it. We're seeing teams draft. We're seeing teams develop. We're seeing teams keep everybody for the most part until there's a threshold where the value to trade a player is greater than the value to keep a player is. That's just great. It's great for the sport. It could not be a healthier situation for a position or for a sport. So Justin Jefferson taking this thing way above was not a surprise, but is just as important as anything else I've told you today. Okay. It's necessary because we don't just have him. We do have other players ready to sign contracts right now that I think are about to grow into this $100 million guaranteed world. Is it a bright future thereafter? I'm a little worried. All right. I'm a little concerned that we're 2 or 3 off seasons away from some sort of lull because Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Quentin Johnson. Now Addison has shown some signs, but now we have this Jefferson contract, right? There's a development process for these first round picks from 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even in some cases, that may not peak, that may not get to the point we are right now, where Devontae Smith and all these rookies just had to get signed. Jaylen Waddle, of course, had to get signed early. So there may be a lull, but maybe not. Maybe the next 2 seasons, those players will absolutely explode, and there'll be just another big, gigantic crop of draft picks, free agents, and extensions like we've had really for 4 off seasons now, 3 to 4 off seasons. But here we are, just full steam ahead at this position. And like I said, not even close to done. And when you got players like Nico Collins in the mix, names that we have on the honorable mentions for possible candidates, and they're getting 3 for 75s kind of out of nowhere, that teams are valuing this just as I've explained to you. All right. It is an uber unique situation in terms of positional spending in any sport that we follow. But it's healthy, it's fun, it's great. And we'll see, like I said, what this next crop can offer us. I would throw a player like Chris Olave in there, shown signs, but I don't think anybody's ready to hand out $100 million guaranteed or even close to this next crop that is just getting going and really needs to start kicking it into gear to get to this level that we've seen, which has just been outstanding across the board. Top 4 guaranteed contracts signed this offseason in terms of that wide receiver. Okay, quickly, let's shift gears to what happened this weekend and maybe one of the reasons that we're seeing some of these extensions come into face, and that's June 1st. It's a big day in the NFL world, as many of you know out there. The dead cap now officially splits between this year and next year. It's not an even 50-50. It is whatever dead cap lives in 2024 on the contract stays in 2024, and any future dead cap, 2025 plus, accelerates into 2025. So it's a 2-year split. This year's dead cap stays. Everything future goes to next year. That's how it works. Now, the one difference is if a player is released that has guaranteed salary, cash, in any future season, that cash comes into 2024. Okay, so you're going to see some instances where UDFAs or maybe even a draft pick or two that had a guaranteed salary in 2025 or later, that dead cap has to become immediate. All right, it's an immediate 2024 dead cap hit. But other than that, this is where teams can kind of maneuver a little bit. We had 13 players designated as post-June 1st releases back in March. I've posted an article on SpotTrade.com that kind of details exactly what happened on June 1st now with those dead cap splits and respective savings, immediate savings now for their teams. A couple of big ones. DJ Humphries with Arizona. I'm very closely monitoring, by the way. They got better pretty damn quickly. I think a lot of their downslide over the past 2 off seasons have to do with Kyler Murray's injury. And I know there's been a lot of BS and contractual stuff going along with him, but the kid can play. I've bulked up. This new regime have bulked up weapon-wise and started to bulk up some moves that I thought teams in their position in terms of the standings should have made in terms of releases, maybe even a couple of trades like a Budda Baker. They didn't make those moves. And for me, that's a clear signal that something internally is positive, right? They like what they've seen, they like what they've done, and they want to give it a chance to percolate a little bit. They've now got $16 million of cap space, okay? This is an organization that I could see going big after as an Xavier Howard, a Justin Simmons, some of the notable free agents that live out there right now that should make an impact at least for 2024, if not multi-year, for a team like Arizona who wants to get back in the conversation. So it's not for nothing, right? A lot of these cap clearings are going to be, let's sign our draft class, let's keep some money in hand for the trade deadline, and let's roll the rest over into 2025. Right? We're at that point for a lot of teams. Arizona, I would put in a little bit different of a window because, like I said, I have a feeling that maybe they had a plan A and a plan B, and they are sticking with plan A, which could involve more adding to this roster. Other notables, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring back the Russell Wilson conversation. That $53 million dead cap hit is now officially on the books. It is historic. It will remain historic. I don't know that we have more situations like this anytime soon, but he has been paid $39 million to go away. They will end up paying about 37 and change because Pittsburgh has added him at $1.21 million, the veteran minimum contract for Russell Wilson this year. Assuming he sticks on the roster for all 18 weeks, that $1.2 million will come off of Denver's books next year as a cap credit, and it'll be slightly less than $3 million at that point, but not now. All right. They will play out all of 2024 with that hit, and they will take another $34 million in 2025. All right. It is just bonkers stuff. I believe it's $32 million next year. Actually, it's an $85 million total dead cap hit. So $53 million this year, $32 million in 2025. It's historic. It's something you can't talk about quite enough. We'll see if it works for both sides. It's one of those unique scenarios where they believe they got their guy in Bo Nix. Whether or not they throw him to the fire in week 1 remains to be seen. And Pittsburgh believes they have upgraded ×2 from Kenny Pickett in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. It's almost impossible in this day in football to carry 2 starting quarterbacks. It just feels like a situation that can't work anymore in this league. They're going to try. Is Russell Wilson going to be a worthy backup quarterback? Certainly he's being paid like a worthy backup quarterback. Both of these players are, quite frankly. I think Fields is about $3 million without looking here. We'll see if this sticks. I love the ability for them to compete all summer, Do both of these players stick on the roster through 2024 remains to be seen. And like I said, it's just a complicated situation because fans and social media really do change the way that teams have considered things like this, because there is immediate pressure, constant pressure that comes onto these organizations and, more importantly, into these players' brains, no matter how much they try to ignore it. So we'll see. That's something to monitor for sure. It's one of those quarterback battles we talked about last week, but it's certainly one to talk about going forward. The Saints had 2 players designated: Michael Thomas, who remains unsigned, and Jameis Winston. Unfortunately, they only freed up about $2.4 million because in order to get these guys off the books without losing cap space, they basically built in dummy years to their contracts last year, dropped them down to a minimum salary this year so they could carry them through June 1st, and now chop off and take on dead cap hits for this and next year. This is just business as usual for the New Orleans Saints. If you follow this team, you expect moves like this every year. This is not a one-off by any regards. Tampa Bay moved on from Shaq Barrett maybe a year before they wanted to, but it's understandable because they had other mouths to feed in the offensive, and another one still coming in Tristan Wirfs. So they only free up about $2 million of space by moving on with this dead cap, but it was a move that they freed up a lot of cash with, which is very important. That's really the name of the game for a team that is looking to sign massive extensions. It's about getting cash off the books so you can turn that into new signing bonuses for other players elsewhere. Outside of that, Jimmy Garoppolo, probably the bigger name here, right? That's the situation where this may have been an untenable release, and he may have had to stick on this roster otherwise, but a PED suspension kind of popped out right around Christmas time, and he'll miss the first 2 weeks because of it. And he lost $11.25 million because of it, because he had a salary guarantee that was guaranteed at signing as soon as he passed that physical at training camp. That 11.25 was going to be his. I still think the Raiders would have released him and paid him that money as a buyout. And now they don't have to because of that PED suspension, that guarantee voided. So the dead cap hits are 4.2 this year, 12.8 next year, and tons of savings for the Raiders, who, I don't know, maybe stuck in purgatory a little bit, but at least don't have that to deal with as well. That would have been salt on the wound. And Jimmy Garoppolo certainly to their benefit. One more, Tre'Davious White with the Bills, freed up $10.2 million June 1st with the post June 1st designation. He has re-signed with the Rams, has no impact. It was the right time to move on from this contract. We'll see if it was the right time to move on from the player. They still feel a little weak in their secondary across the board, including safety. Time to move on from, or time to fix that maybe. Maybe a little bit of wiggle room, right? Maybe they're thinking about one of these cornerbacks and safeties that are hanging out there that I mentioned. I don't think they can swing as big as Justin Simmons, but maybe this means they can bring back Micah Hyde on a near minimum contract, who has considered retirement or Buffalo as his option for 2024. So we'll see if that becomes a factor or a fiction for the next couple of weeks. But 10.2 certainly helps a team that was down in the ones in terms of top 51 cap space. They'll be able to sign their draft class, something they haven't done at all yet, and maybe a little bit of room left over for one sign in the secondary or at a linebackers position where they certainly need something. All this is available on SpotTrack.com right now. I've got a full post June 1st salary cap update, and soon I will be breaking down all these wide receiver contracts, because that's just, like I said, it's what I'm geeking out on right now. I'll have Nico Collins, Jaylen Waddle, and certainly Justin Jefferson when that becomes available as soon as possible. And we'll be on the heels of Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and possibly some more coming after that, because it's a huge, huge ordeal. It's a position that is unlike any other, and we'll be following it as much as possible. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Track Podcast.